doing?
Wait a minute. Back that up. Pause there. How did they do this shot? In this program, you're going to find out how filmmakers use the very basic principles of cinematography to create shots like this and every other shot in movies and television. Okay, let's roll.
Let's lock it up nice and quiet all around, please. And we are rolling.
If I would have to choose a tool that defines my job the most, it's light. The first person that I'm always communicating with, and it's the most important relationship, is the director. It's a great collaboration, and I enjoy working with him a lot.
The role of the DP is to take the ideas in the director's head of what the movie's supposed to look like and what it's supposed to feel like, and translate that into actual visuals.
The art of cinema is all about capturing the moment. All right, ready. This is our frame. Hi, I'm Rick Robinson. I'm a director of photography and a mentor at the International Academy of Film and Television in Cebu, Philippines. Welcome to the Filmmaker Series.
The DP is basically in charge of the lighting and the camera work for the movies. On set, it's in conjunction with the first AD, it's planning your day in a way that you know you can get all the shots the director needs to put the scene together.
The influence of a director of photography, probably the most important part is during the meeting right before the principal of photography that he has with the director.
And at some point when you sit down with the director, you look at the tools that you may have available to be able to pull off some of the things that's going to create the biggest impact to what's going to stimulate the audience.
The DP uses lots of equipment in their job, but the main tools are the camera, lighting equipment, and a light meter to judge the intensity of the lights and to help decide on the proper exposure.
For me as a director who came up not through working on a set as much, I came up through screenwriting. So on a technical aspect, I rely on my DP a great deal, maybe more so than any other crew position on a film. I mean, they're the first line of getting my vision of what I want the film to look like on screen. So for me personally, I rely completely on the DP to get that look that I'm looking for, because it's not like I can walk on a set and light it myself or even give specific instructions on how I want it lit.
The biggest challenge of being a DP is not the technical things. It's not creating the mood that you want to create, because really if you're good at your job, you know how to do that.
No, I need to be one to cut out.
I don't understand that.
The challenge of working on a movie set in just about every department is working with the personalities and the politics of a set.
I don't have to go at all.
These are the situations that there is no blueprint of how to follow them, but you'll be faced with every day.
Yeah, that would work, if we can avoid it.
A lot of people think the camera operator's job is the coolest job on the set. In fact, the camera operator has a greater deal of responsibility than most people think, because there's so many things going on inside the frame and so many decisions that have to be made, aside from composition and framing.
But because the DP is in charge of both the lighting and the camera work, I rely on my camera operator to be my hands for that scene, and to, after I explain the idea of the camera work or of the shot that we're looking for, that he will then take that and work with the key grip and the camera assistants to set up that shot. So while I'm working on the lighting, I can come back then and he can show me the shot that I've described to him.
With the static camera and static subject, both the camera and the action remain stationary in the frame.
Help protect them from themselves. Amen.
Pass the cheese.
With the static camera moving subject, the camera remains stationary while the action moves within the frame.
Stay with us.
Compensating to the right or left is a technique we refer to as panning. Compensating up or down, we refer to that technique as tilting.
Will you be my wife?
To accomplish these basic moves, the camera is mounted on one of two camera supports. The first is the fluid head. With a fluid head, we physically move the camera up and down and side to side with the use of a pan handle. The head itself is then mounted on a dolly, a tripod, or perhaps a crane. The second widely used camera support is the geared head. With the geared head, we move the camera with a set of wheels. The left wheel pans the camera from side to side, while the right wheel tilts it up and down. Removing the operator from touching the camera directly, a geared head makes for steadier camera moves, especially with long lenses.
Moving the camera into or away from the subject can increase or diminish the importance within the context of the story. The next example is the moving camera static subject. The camera moves while the subject remains stationary. This gives the audience a sense of involvement. Dollying the camera into the character's face can emphasize the character's moment of realization.
It had to be done. You know it. I know it. Hi, girls.
You're crazy.
Our last technique is the moving camera moving subject. This allows the camera and the subject to move together through space, and it gives the audience that much more of a sense of involvement. Tracking shots can be very simple, but a very effective dynamic with a tremendous amount of production value or aesthetic quality. So, our question is, when would the director decide to move the camera and why?
Moving the camera gives a director the possibility of giving a mood and a tone to the things he's shooting.
Moving the camera is one of the most effective tools that a director has to get the audience involved in either a character or a particular scene. So when we think about a shot and we're setting up a shot, one of the things we look at is the dynamic of the shot or the dynamic of the scene. In some cases, where the camera is static, it adds a certain quality to the scene or to the shot, but in many cases, just adding a little more movement to the camera gives a little bit more of a dynamic to the scene.
For a dramatic impact, a movement called pushing in is often used, where the camera will slowly dolly toward the subject. This gives the impression of tension. The opposite of that would be like a zoom in, like in the home video camera when you're zooming all the time. It's a very mechanical and rather unfeeling kind of movement.
When we think about zooming, if there is a motivated reason for using a zoom, it's something that works for me. Otherwise, zooming is something that just is not a natural phenomenon that we do. When we look at something, we don't zoom in or zoom out, or we can focus on something, but we don't naturally zoom. One of the things that zooms offer is it gives us an opportunity to vary the focal length that we're working in, but it helps us move or adjust something that's in the frame because it's moving in the frame and we need to.
We're trapped in here?
We'll be okay. We just need to stick together. A single assailant rarely attacks a group.
So what do we do? Just sit here?
Everyone back to the lobby. Move! Come on!
The simplest way to move the camera is in handheld mode. The camera resting on a shoulder, handles are attached to help the operator keep control. This allows an operator to move the camera freely throughout the set. The drawback is that camera moves are not nearly as steady as on the dolly. And most cameras are pretty heavy, which makes it tough on the camera operator, especially toward the end of a long day. The dolly is a very common way to move the camera. Resting on track to keep the move smooth, the camera is usually mounted to a hydraulic arm.
The dolly shot gives a very nice feeling of floating. You're actually moving towards something. The perspective changes the way we see perspective. When we see a perspective change, it's because we walk in closer to it or walk away from it.
Artillery at home?
Affirmative. The hand grenades are stored in the dining buffet.
So as you can see, New Concept Mandarin is making revenues now.
Physically moving a camera up and down is a technique called booming. It's one of the most basic camera moves and is often done on a dolly. The dolly has a hydraulic arm controlled by the dolly grip. This is what allows you to boom up and down smoothly.
Da 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 da!
Oh, hey.
Good morning.
The least expensive dolly is a doorway dolly. It's basically a tripod on a moving platform, which makes booming in the shot impossible. But as you can see, it can still be very effective.
You're crazy.
To move the camera in tight spaces, a skateboard dolly can be used.
Yeah, so that'll just track perfectly, right?
Yeah. I mean, go to the other end.
The drawback is that panning and tilting within a shot is impossible.
Here he goes.
The Steadicam is a body harness with a levered arm that holds the camera, and it has all the flexibility and movement of a dolly along with its smoothness, just without the track.
It's designed to go where a traditional dolly or crane doesn't go.
You can go upstairs, around corners, totally unencumbered by the movement of dollies.
Because it doesn't use any track, the Steadicam is a very versatile way to move the camera. You can look at the floor, you can do 360s, there's no equipment left in your way.
So if we have a shot and we have to make a decision between a Steadicam and a traditional dolly, I think a lot of people get confused with the fact that the Steadicam, although it's a cool invention, it's a cool device, when you've had the opportunity to wear a Steadicam and to be the person on the other side of that, it can be challenging and it can be a curse at the same time.
I'm a first string forward. Haven't been practicing because of a knee injury, but should be okay by the season opener.
Sometimes you need even more stability and flexibility, so you combine the Steadicam and the dolly. Mounting the camera on a crane is a great way to get extremely high angles while still having the flexibility to move it around. The crane is basically a long metal arm balanced on a post. On one end, you put the camera, an operator, and perhaps your assistant camera. On the other end, you counterbalance with lead weights. There are many different types of cranes, and they come in a variety of different sizes. Each are designed to different specifications, and you decide on which crane you need depending on what kind of shot you're doing. Some cranes are designed not to have someone physically operate the camera, so a motorized remote head is used. This allows you to get the camera high up in the air while still being able to operate it. While most remote heads are set up with a two-wheeled geared head configuration, some use a joystick to control the camera. And others have a motorized fluid head. Putting a crane on a track is a way to add even more movement to your shot. The telescopic crane is another way to create really dynamic shots. Instead of being at a fixed length like most cranes, it expands and contracts to create even more flexibility with your camera movement. It is completely motorized right down to the counterbalance weights. You can see them sliding up and down on the arm. For an even more dynamic camera, sometimes we put cranes on the move. And no matter which type you use, the crane is a great way to create dynamic shots for your project. But just remember that using a crane is not always easy.
It's the most difficult thing I've ever had to do on a film set is choreographing a well-conceived crane shot.
Oh, wow. This is amazing.
So we established the house in a way that you thought that the house was not on a hill. Then we show the audience that we're dropping, and we go through a bunch of trees and we come down to our two main actors and they're staring up at this grandiose house. The people who actually have to accomplish this are a camera operator, two camera assistants, one pulling focus and one adjusting the zoom lens, 3 grips, one on the camera end of the crane, one on the weighted end of the crane, and another one actually pushing the dolly back and forth.
There are many creative ways to use a crane, but they're not always to get just the camera up in the air. To create the surreal party sequence in Universal, we created an elaborate setup on a crane. This shot gets in the head of our lead character after she's been delivered some really bad news. To help accentuate her state of mind, we wanted the party to be going on around her without her truly interacting. To help achieve this effect, we mounted lighting next to the camera and had our lead actress sit in the chair usually reserved for the operator. With this unmanned camera setup, we moved the crane throughout the party, which allowed our actress to stay basically stationary in frame while the party goes on around her. As you can see, she floated right over the pool, and in the end a very surreal move, floating up into the air. This is one of those shots that definitely takes a break from reality, but I think it really gets into the head of the character and really worked out well. When shooting a scene in a car, we still have to use lighting. This is true during the day, but is especially critical at night. This makes it dangerous for the actors to actually drive, so we put it on a rig and tow it around. This allows the actors to forget about actually driving and allows us to get the shots and lighting that we need. And for shots where you see the car as well as the road around it, the actor has to do his own driving. In those cases, we use a camera car to mount our cameras and cover the action.
In order for us to understand the principles of screen direction and action axis, we first must have a fundamental understanding of the frame. When we talk about the frame, we're talking about what we see when we look through the camera lens or on the small screen or on the big screen. This is our frame.
The aspect ratio is generally determined by where you want to show your project. By aspect ratio, we're talking about the relationship between the width of your image and the height. If you're headed toward a theatrical distribution, you use either 1.85 or 2.35 to 1. If you're headed to HD TV, that aspect ratio is 16:9. Other viewing devices like the iPhone or the iPad have aspect ratios all of their own. They don't match either the TV or the theatrical standards. Because of this, the screen may be letterboxed with bars at the top and bottom of the screen in order to preserve the original aspect ratio. This may be necessary on an HD TV as well. The aspect ratio of older films and television shows was 1.33 to 1, and as you can see, it is a much more square format than today's standards. When watching these on a 16:9 HD TV, bars will be placed at the sides of the screen in order to preserve the more square aspect ratio. This is what an actor sees when they're standing in front of the camera. Unfortunately, what's on an actor's right is on the camera operator's left. To keep from getting confused, we only use the camera's point of view when talking about screen direction.
This is screen right, or camera right. And this is screen left, or camera left. So if the action in the frame is going this way, then we would make that reference of left facing right, or left to right. And in reverse, if the action is this way, then we would make that reference of right facing left, or screen right to left. Now that we have a fundamental understanding of the frame, the action within the frame, and screen direction, let's look at some of the other principles that help us become better filmmakers. One of the principles I like to refer to is something called the 5 C's of cinematography. Now, the 5 C's is something that is not just limited to cinematographers, but directors and editors, and it's very helpful and useful information for people both in front of and behind the camera. The first C is continuity.
Be okay. Just need to stick together.
When you watch this handheld scene we saw earlier, you realize that there are no edits throughout the scene. This is great if the handheld feel suits the emotion of your scene. If not, it will take multiple shots in order to cover your scene. The multiple camera setups decided on by the director in order to capture all of the action of a scene is called coverage. Making sure things stay consistent from shot to shot is the basis of continuity.
Usually on set there's someone that's responsible to make sure that from one shot to the next, everything is consistent, or there's a logical flow of continuity. That person is usually referred to as the script supervisor or the continuity person.
With 2 or more actors on screen, the first wide shot of a sequence establishes a relationship between them. So if an actor is looking at someone on screen right in the first shot and nobody moves, we want them to be looking screen right in every shot after that.
House all day. I moved to the basement. I still can't get anything done. Easier to have a place in the city. Besides, I'm not there that much, am I?
Being consistent shot to shot is the key to avoid confusion. And to help us keep continuity, we use the 180-degree rule. Here's a typical camera setup which will help us demonstrate the 180-degree rule. The camera's point of view will determine which actor is on screen right and which one is on screen left. To keep this consistent throughout the scene, we will use the stage line or action axis line as our reference. This is an imaginary line drawn through the middle of both actors. Once this line is established, the camera has 180 degrees in which to operate. As long as you stay on this side of the line, the screen direction will stay consistent. But if you cross over the stage line, everything that was once on screen right now becomes screen left, thereby breaking the 180-degree rule.
Other areas to break continuity could be wardrobe or color or simply background action or distractions.
Because continuity is so important, actors have to be very consistent from take to take. For example, if they lift a glass with their right hand in the first take, they have to be consistent and do that in every take after that, or the action won't match. And that action needs to stay consistent with every camera setup until the entire scene has been shot. So with all these potential problems with continuity, a lot of people ask, well, why don't we just shoot with several cameras, therefore all the action will match? Actually, it's done all the time, but there are downsides to shooting with 2 cameras. Because you need to keep the second camera out of the shot, this limits where you can put your camera. So you may not be able to get the exact shot you want, but shooting with 2 cameras can save time. Using multiple cameras on scenes with safety issues like stunts is a great way to cut down on the number of times you have to do something dangerous. Another downside to multiple camera setups is that your lighting is a bit compromised. Having more cameras means seeing more of the set, and seeing more of the set limits where you can put your lighting. Not only that, but a light that may be great for one shot might not work so well for the other. So instead of having the optimal lighting setup for each individual shot, you may not have the ideal lighting for either. In the end, shooting with 1 or multiple cameras comes down to personal choice. For many, the advantages of shooting with 2 cameras outweigh the downside. And for others, the additional control that a 1-camera setup allows outweighs the benefit of getting more than 1 shot at a time.
Our next C of cinematography is camera angles. One of the most dynamic and visual challenges that a director of photography may have, or a cameraman or a director, is where to place the lens. Camera angles is something that really controls the dynamic visual stimuli for the audience. By putting the camera in specific places, it can create a sense of involvement, emotion, and has quite an impact to the audience. The high angle creates a sense of distance or creates a sense of inferiority to the subject. The low angle creates a sense of power and makes the subject more majestic. The deadpan creates more of a bird's eye view of the action for the audience. The POV, or the point of view, gives the perspective of the actor or a third person for the audience.
So what do you do when the best camera angle for the scene is from inside of a toilet? One that has to flush. The toilet flush scene is one of those shots that it's actually a fun challenge. Well, since you obviously can't use a toilet, you find a substitute. We used a glass sink and attached a toilet bowl lid to it. We built this into a rig large enough to help us hold our lighting, as well as to raise the sink up enough that we could put a full-size 35mm camera underneath.
We put a wide-angle lens right up against it. We just put a toilet seat on top, and just enough so you can see the arch of the seat.
And to help simulate the flush, we attached a hose controlled by the special effects crew. Because of the context of the scene, it was supposed to be in a small little bathroom. Well, this whole big rig in a small bathroom doesn't really work, so we actually shot it in the living room, set up some false walls to make it feel like a smaller room. All these different elements had to come together, and while we were rolling, it's all these departments working together for that, 40 seconds that we're rolling. And, it takes a couple takes to get everybody in sync, but once it did, it was a great shot.
And action.
Okay.
What are you doing?
We'll learn a little bit more about camera placement and camera angles later, so let's move on to the next cinematography C. That would be close-ups.
When we talk about close-ups in conjunction with the 5 C's of cinematography, we're really talking about frame size and the emotional difference between a wide shot and a close-up. A wide shot is often used to show the environment around a character, but it can also be used to impart an emotion, like making a character feel small or isolated. On the other end of the lens, the close-up can be used to really get up close and personal. And the closer we are to a character, the easier it is to see some of the smaller emotional nuances, like the tick of an eye or a tremble of a hand. The extensive use of close-ups throughout a scene can give a claustrophobic kind of feeling. This is because we don't see the environment around the characters. So when you're choosing your lens to cover a particular part of a scene, you have to keep in mind the emotional impact that lens will have. This scene's a great example of showing the emotional arc of a story through frame size.
Do anything exciting this afternoon, darling? Linda.
If you watch carefully, the coverage of the male character starts in close-ups and slowly gets wider.
Taking the silent treatment a little far, aren't you?
While the coverage of our actress starts wide and gets tight.
Ling?
Mr. Travis?
Could you put some music on, please? The conversation is a bit lacking.
I don't want any music.
The frame size helps illustrate a power shift between these two characters. So as you can see, using frame size to help tell the story can be very powerful.
Our next C in cinematography is composition. Composition is simply the arrangement of the subject and the action within the frame.
没时间了，新娘，快点！
我去开。
Now, one of the rules that we apply in composition is something that we call the rule of thirds. In the rule of thirds, you want to allow not more than 2/3 of the frame for the action of the subject and 1/3 of the frame for something we call leading space. Now, the leading space is something that helps establish the direction in which the action is going. Then, we want to divide the frame horizontally into thirds, and at the point where the lines intersect, those are our strong points, and we use those for composing the shot. Generally, we want to frame the eyes at the strong points, and it helps us to compose the shot and balance the frame. Sometimes to achieve that, it becomes quite a challenge for the operator because you have to work around what we call bogeys in the frame. For instance, if you zoom out, you'll see some of the obstacles that we have to work with: the microphone, the C or century stand within the frame. Now, if we zoom back and recompose our shot, we find that keeping up with the action a lot of times requires the camera to always be moving and trying to keep up with what's going on, something I call ABC, always be composing. That means if the action goes to the right or to the left, you have to quickly make a decision as to how you want to compose the shot.
Oh, God.
The tricky part about a reflection shot is that because of the angle, the specific angle of where the lens has to be and the actor has to be to see the reflection and not see the camera at the same time makes it very hard. You have to put down very specific marks for the actor and very specific marks for the camera. Moving just a little bit 1 inch to one way or another either puts the actor out of the reflection of the mirror or puts the camera into the reflection of the mirror. So framing and composition standpoint, that's the trickiest part.
We want to move on now to our next C, which is cutting. Cutting is something that is very important, and essentially it involves all of the other 4 C's of cinematography. So if you study the other 4 C's of cinematography and apply all of the principles and things that we've learned up to this point, then cutting is something that will be very easy for you. See if you can find what's wrong with this cut. Did you see the mistake? In the first shot, the actor has both hands on his waist. In the closer shot, both hands are raised in the air, creating a mismatch in action. It's important that you match the action on both sides of the cut. One of the things that you find that can be kind of strange with if you have anybody that's a cinematographer that works with light. I mean, we're visualists, and in the middle of a conversation, sitting in a restaurant talking to someone, while you're talking, and you find yourself staring at someone really strange, and them looking back at you and saying, "What are you looking at?" And you say, "Well, I'm just looking at how the light's hitting you at this very moment. It's very interesting how the light's hitting you." So you put that in your memory banks because it's a look that you want to recreate sometime.
Really, the basics of being a DP and the rules that are involved are only technical, but while you're bound by some of the physics of what we do, there are no other rules. So there's no right way or wrong way to light a film. It's just about creating the right look and feel for a project. Exteriors are difficult for DPs because we're control freaks. We want everything to be exactly how we want it. Unfortunately, the sun constantly moves. There's clouds. You can't control it. So most of what you're doing outside in an exterior is augmenting what you have and making it try to work for you.
One of the best tools for exterior lighting is the soap. By putting a silk over the actors, we're able to soften the very harsh sunlight as well as fill in some of the dark shadows. Here's a great example. See how the direct sun is casting unflattering shadows? Here's the same shot with the silk. While it's still a very naturalistic look, we've eliminated the harsh sunlight and deep shadows and created a much more flattering lighting setup.
It's all about being able to control the environment, or working in an environment where you have control over the look that you want.
Because the camera works a little differently than our eyes, we rarely can use just the natural light on a practical location. You generally need to add to it, and on stage you need to create it all yourself. But no matter which situation I'm in for a daytime interior, all I'm trying to do is replicate a natural-looking lighting source while still making it work for the camera.
One of the ways to control that is for you to supply your own light. So that's where you are in a controlled environment, and by lighting it with your lights and using your own source of lighting, you can control and you can keep that look consistent.
When you're looking at a scene and there's something about it you don't like, maybe there's an overall brightness of the scene that you don't like, you look at all the different factors that make up that brightness. If it's an HD shoot and you're looking at the monitor and it's just overall too bright, adjusting the aperture might be your best bet. But if it's only a particular area of the frame that's too bright, adjusting the lights or whatever the source is, adjusting that will take down just that area of the scene instead of overall. Shooting night scenes as a DP is great because it's like working on a stage. You start with nothing, and the only things you can see are what you want people to see. For a DP to have that kind of control, that's exciting. Making it realistic, that's the challenge. You know, I've read so many scripts that say it's pitch black and you can't see anything. As a DP, I read that and I say, oh, that's great, they don't even need me that day, because it's just a black screen, but it's not. So, you know, the conceit of a DP is to make it feel dark and yet still be able to see something.
Unfortunately, cameras don't really capture light the same way that your eyes do. Your eyes are much more sensitive and have a much greater range between what is bright and what is dark. So we're working within the parameters of whatever particular camera or film stock that we're using. So when you walk in a movie set and it's a night scene, the first thing that comes to your mind is, this, you know, it's so bright on this set, what's going on? I thought this was a night scene. So the job of a DP is to create a lighting setup that mimics what your eyes see, but in a way that the camera can register. And this job becomes a careful dance between the brightness of your lights on set and careful exposure to get the exact look that's right for the scene.
First thing you do as a DP is to say, what kind of scene do we have? Is this a nighttime scene where it should be really warm and fuzzy? Or is this a nighttime scene that, you know, needs to be cold and dark, you know, and have a little grittier feel? And the color temperature you use has a great effect on that. Because if you think in your mind's eye of, you know, a small lit room with candles and, you know, you have two lovers sitting there, that's more of a warm, fuzzy feel. So you might go with a lower color temperature to more emulate the candles or firelight or things like that. Whereas the higher color temperatures, the more the blues, it's the more steely look gives it a colder, less intimate feel.
When you go outside at night, generally there's a source of light, and the whole idea is to replicate that same feel. Usually the moon is our key light that we reference in film, and that light is what we want to replicate in a scene. That plus maybe street lights or other ambient lights, car lights, other things that would give us a natural light. So by just looking at how light naturally falls, just looking at a scene and looking at how some of the things that actually happen and how lights vary in color and feel and temperature, you want to replicate that, whether it's day or night.
It's a balance between, you know, what you want to see and what you don't want to see, and how deep your shadows are. And what you don't light is more important than what you light, to me, in nighttime situations.
When you see a night exterior in the movies or on TV, the streets are always wet.
What wetting the pavement does in a nighttime scene is it adds depth to the situation. When you wet down a road or pavement or whatever, a light that's in the distant background will kind of smear itself in a way that just adds depth to a scene. And it's
it's kind of a cliche, but we all love doing it because it really just adds a great feel to a nighttime exterior.
When you look at locations, the locations always give you bigger challenges. It gives you more production value in some cases.
I love shooting on practical locations, but they're limiting because you haven't constructed it in a way that's perfect for the camera. And oftentimes your lighting can be very limited due to the architecture of the location. But on the other side of the coin, there's a realism that happens on a location that is more difficult on a set. Having said that, with a great production designer, you can go in and create a set that works perfectly for the camera as well as for the look and feel that you're going for. And to walk onto a stage and into a set can instantly pull you into a realistic world, but it's more expensive. In the early stages of a production, the director will talk to the locations department about what they see for each location in the script. The locations department then goes out and finds potential options for the shoot. To help decide if a location will actually work, a tech scout is scheduled. A tech scout is when the heads of department all visit a potential location and look at it to make sure that it will work for their department.
When you're doing a tech scout, usually the tech scout, it comes after you've already had a production meeting and you've talked with the director about what you want to do.
Location scouting is hugely important to a DP. When you're reading a script, you kind of have a particular look in your head and you devise what this set's going to look like, and you think, okay, I'm going to have this light over here and it's going to come across like this. But then when you get in the practical location where you're shooting, that lighting design might not work at all based on where you can put lights and the size of a room and the ceilings and all sorts of different things.
Tech Scout is designed for us to find out and work out those little discrepancies and find out what we have, what the real situation is that we have in terms of logistical requirements and technical production requirements we need in terms of power and just the logistics of being able to do what we need to do.
When you're scouting, it's looking at what lighting design had I planned. Is it going to work here? When we're talking about what the camera's going to do, the camera movement itself, is it going to be feasible on this location? You're really looking at how many options you have and trying to keep as many avenues open as possible.
Many directors rely on the use of storyboards. In many cases, storyboards are a great tool for a director and blocking a scene or just figuring out the look of a film. But one of the downsides with storyboards is that in many cases the storyboards are simply the vision of the storyboard artist and not the director. It's important that you work with the storyboard artist to ensure that the artist is capturing your vision so that it helps you in blocking your scenes. The other downside is that storyboards and shot lists are simply references, and on the day things can change. So you have to be flexible and understanding that things can change on the day.
For the first-time filmmaker, whether you use storyboards or not, there's solutions for both, especially if you use storyboards and you find yourself on the set and they're not really useful because maybe you've added an actor to this scene in a rewrite, or the location doesn't exactly match the original storyboards that were done. So in these situations, that's when you, again, if you've done your homework and you're prepared, you can just create a shot list on the spot, especially if you're in a scene that involves a limited number of actors. And it's also a good chance, to use your DP for suggestions in this, in this situation. And so many cases I've just pulled out a piece of paper and we've just sat down and started to figure out what kind of coverage do we need, where can we put the camera, if we put it here, let's get it tight here, a medium shot here. And if you're prepared and know your story and know what you want to convey in the scene, you can quickly come up with a shot list that will then work and get you out of the scene and moving on to your next shot.
It always scares me when I get one of these perfect little storyboard pamphlets that have storyboards all the way through how things are going to go shot to shot. Because when you get out on location on the day, you see everything's different. You see that that beautiful window that was supposed to be there is not there, or this particular the environment is totally different. Logistically, there's some issues that aren't the same. No matter how you look at it, the language of film today is spoken in binary code. And because of the advancement in digital technology, the gap between film and video is getting smaller and smaller. I think if you asked me 10 years ago, what's the difference, the biggest difference between film and video, I would say that there's a really distinct difference between the two. Film has a distinct look and a distinct feel and has set a precedence.
The decision to go either film or video is made because of many factors. One, and the biggest one is, what's the right feel for the project? The secondary concern is what kind of budget do we have, and what's the best thing within the budget that's also going to fit the mood of the picture. It's
a little controversial because people feel that video is still video, and film is still the reigning champion of formats, and I agree with that.
Today, film has a much greater latitude and dynamic range than a digital camera. That means that it has more levels of detail between what is white and what is black. For example, bright areas turn white much sooner with digital cameras than with film. Here's a good example. Look at the wall lights in this behind-the-scene video. See how there's absolutely no detail in the light itself? Now look at the wall light in the finished scene shot on film. The detail in the light itself is much greater. But this is something that should get better with each generation of new technology.
The last film I did was shot on 35mm. Essentially, I was really happy with how it came out. It looked great. But this next project will be my first one filming a movie in a digital format. My biggest concern with when it was suggested that we shoot it this way is just the overall look that we can get in the film and making sure we can make it look as rich as a movie shot on film.
When we look into the future and we see technological advances coming at us, film is still going to be the premier format in shooting features. But in the long run, we are going to be seeing more and more digital productions.
So that's it. Cinematography is an art and a science, and regardless of whether you're a director or a cameraman, it's very beneficial information that's very useful for you in front of and behind the camera. I'm Rick Robinson, and happy shooting.